Hi, everyone. For a Filthy Lot Entertainment, welcome to Drawn and Cornered. It's the show that corners today's best comic book artists as they answer deep dive questions while they draw art suggested by fans. After the show, you can bid on the art, and all the proceeds will go to our guest's charity of choice. So make sure you watch through to the end to see the final product. In this issue, we talk with Farel Dalrymple. His storybook style can be described as whimsical, dark, complex, and colorful, and his works include the incredible It Will All Hurt, Pop Gun War, The Wrenchies, Prophet, and Proxima Centauri, among other amazing books from Marvel and DC, as well as many memorable and sought-after variant covers. Today, we're lucky to have him in the drawing chair. Farel, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you're going to draw and what charity this is going to benefit?
Yeah, I was going to draw a Swamp Thing, and it's for the charity Don't Shoot PDX, which is a local Portland, Oregon organization to help, I guess, combat police violence and injustice.
Excellent. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. And I can't wait to see what this Swamp Thing is going to look at the end of this interview. We'd like to go all the way back to the beginning here on Drawn and Cornered to learn what got you into comics. Now, I know you've said in the past that you were a Marvel kid, but do you remember your first comic, and was it instant love?
I think the first comic that I bought, like at the Safeway or whatever, the spinner rack, was a couple issues of Marvel Team Up.
Oh, cool.
And it was like, I think it was like one, because I don't know if you remember Marvel Team Up, but it was like Spider-Man was in every issue. And then they had like a guest star. And then this was like, these two issues were like, I think it was like the Vision in one issue and then Scarlet Witch in the next, because they were married, like a couple. So it was basically like Vision and Scarlet Witch in both issues. And I remember actually getting those from the store, and those were like the first comics that I owned. But yeah, I had a buddy that bought comics, and he was like into like Ron the Space Knight and Hulk and stuff like that. And I remember when G.I. Joe came out, like the toys and stuff, the comics came out around the same time, I guess, because it was all like Larry Hama helping, create the franchise and stuff for Hasbro and Marvel. And a kid brought into, and I just was like, oh, whatever, those are toys, I think I was like in the third grade, but I had like older friends, and I thought it was like cool. And then a kid brought in, he brought in a gun from one of the actors, I think it was like Zap's laser gun. And I was just like fascinated with that gun. I was like, oh, that's so cool. I want to get these toys, but and then he was telling me that they had comics of G.I. Joe. And then I was like hooked. Like when I saw the comics, I was like, oh, and I think I started like issue 8 or something. And then I got all the back issues, which were kind of expensive then. And I think I had the whole run up to like 50. And then I got bored of comics for a while.
You also mentioned in previous interviews that you were influenced by Walt Simonson, as well as Mobius and Stan Lee's Silver Surfer. Can you talk about what it was like to discover, those books at the time?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I would say that's like 99% Mobius on that on that thing. I wouldn't. I mean, I like Stan Lee's voice on Spider-Man is Amazing Friends, but I wouldn't necessarily say his like writing style or anything influenced me. And I guess like after reading that Sean Howe book, I already was kind of like annoyed at the fact that everyone knew who Stan Lee was, but no one knows like Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko are. And after reading that book, I was just like, oh man, that guy was the best person in the not to speak ill of the dead or anything, but it just sounded like he would always come out of those corporate meetings with like a better deal, and like all the people that actually made the comics had but yeah, Mobius, I love his work, and that it was cool getting that. I remember around when they made that Silver Surfer story. That was like, I think for me, definitely for me, and probably for like a lot of other people, that was like a lot of people's first introduction to Mobius, because I think that was around the same time that they did the Epic comics. They were reprinting a lot of Mobius's stories in the Epic comics line at Marvel, and so I would get those too. But like that, Silver Surfer story, and I remember even thinking the writing was pretty corny at the time, even as like a young person, like reading that and like, where's all the other superheroes? Why is it just Silver Surfer on Earth and Galactus? Like, where's the Fantastic Four and all that, But I just years later looking at that, I'm just like, oh, that was a great, kind of alternate version, other worlds type story.
Yeah.
But I think the coolest thing about that Silver Surfer comic was the essay in the back that Mobius wrote about lettering and all the different aspects of making a comic. And I really like that, really hit home with me, like stuck with me, about how he thinks the lettering is part of the artwork, and that it shouldn't have a separate letter. You should just, I know for like monthly comics, it's too problematic. You can't do that, everyone, one person do everything. But I don't know, that really, I think kind of put a bias in my head of like, oh yeah, hand lettering by the artist, it will always look better than a computer font or like a typeset.
Now, your style also has a storybook feel to it, especially in the soft colors. I get kind of a Maurice Sendak vibe from some of your work. Is that fair to say, or am I way off?
Oh yeah, I love him. I love his work. He's a big influence on me for sure. I'm working on a children's book story right now with a writer. And I look at a lot of Maurice Sendak stuff, and Richard Scarry too, especially
nice.
the earlier Richard Scarry stuff before he, there's like the more painterly stuff when you like paint his children's stories, and then he'd switch to like a line art that was like I don't know how they colored it. Was probably like acetate or something, but it was like it has a whole different look to it that I don't care for as much. Probably the biggest children's book illustrator though for me was especially when I was learning how to watercolor, is this artist named Elizabeth Zwerger. I don't know if you know her stuff at all.
Elizabeth Zwerger.
It's like Zwerger. I think she's like Swedish or Swiss or something like that.
Austrian.
Okay. But yeah, she's great. Like Newbery Award winner. I think she does like a lot of like classic adaptations. But, she has this loose, like a loose watercolor style. I think the first book of hers I saw was The Selfish Giant, and it's like an Oscar Wilde story. It's really short. Nice. It's like just like a thin, like a floppy. Like the one I have is just like, I don't even know how many pages, like 32 pages or something. It's like real short. Real simple watercolor, and I like the way she would just kind of put like a swath of like red for someone's cheeks or something, or they're just like, and then it's like, oh, okay, it like the best artist, or the artists that I guess resonate with me the most are the ones that where I look at their stuff and I'm like, oh, I want to try to do that, whatever they did, like inspires me to, like, oh, I kind of see what's going on there, like I look at like, someone like Alex Ross or something, which I have like a ton of respect for, and I like his art a lot, but like usually when I look at one of his things, I'm just like, oh man, that looks like really hard. What he did is like really difficult. But looking at her work, where it's like, it is, I'm sure I'm not saying anyone could do it, but it's like seeing her work where it's like, oh, I want to do that. I want to try to do what she did. I don't think I get to that level, but it's like, makes me want to strive for that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, her artwork is so unique looking. It's very interesting. It almost looks like so like European greeting cards. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah. It's really pretty, I guess.
Now, do you remember the first comic that you made?
Yeah. I mean, I remember like high school doing like a comic that I would show my friend, maybe even junior high too. It was like something called like Beware Danger or something like that, and it was like these ninja secret agent guys. It was like two dudes and a girl, and they went on some mission into some, it was basically like G.I. Joe inspired, like Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow and all that kind of stuff.
Perfect.
But it's first comic I ever got, or that I was in, that was published. It was something I did when I was 16, and it was for a guy named Nate Butler, and it was a 3D comic a 3D science fiction comic that was Christian. So it was like a, because I was raised like really religious. And so when I met Nate, I was like, yay, Jesus, you know. And he's a really nice guy, and I'm not saying anything about negative about religion or anything, but like I'm like pretty much an atheist now. And so it's kind of funny. It's like, oh, that's the first comic I did. And it was like, when I was 16, it was like 8 pages or something like that. And he paid me for it. And was like, and Ray Zone did 3D on it.
was it, now we're talking specifically about Behold 3D. Is that the name of the
Behold
book?
3D. Yeah. Yeah. Are you familiar?
Well, I mean, from your Wikipedia page.
Oh, okay.
I don't think I've ever seen it out in the wild as a book. Is it? I mean, I doubt it's in print still.
Oh no, I'm sure you could find copies somewhere. Like probably Mile High Comics has 20 copies or something sitting somewhere.
Yeah, they got everything. In the early 2000s, you were working on Pop Gun War, the story of an inner city boy who discovers a pair of discarded angel wings. Where did this idea stem from? Was it the image that came first, or was it knowing you wanted to explore certain ideas and then the story came later?
Yeah, I would say the story kind of took a backseat to the I guess the feeling that I wanted to do. I was living in New York at the time, and I was graduated from art school, but I would still go and sit in on some classes occasionally. Specifically, this one teacher's class, John Ruggieri, he taught this class called Drawing on Location. And we just go around to different places in New York, and we would like draw skyscrapers or go sit in the park and draw people and people playing chess and things like that. And that got me kind of out thinking outside of doing, you know, like drawing backgrounds and stuff was always like intimidating, challenge. It still kind of is, especially if I'm like unfamiliar with something. You know, because I want everything to look right. Like, okay, where's the horizon line and all the, you know, perspective line, like where's it all going to, you know, 3D, all that stuff. And being in that, sitting in that class, like really freed me up, because I just started looking and just drawing what I saw rather than worrying about, you know, make sure all the lines are straight and everything. I just, you know, and I felt like, oh, you know, most of the comic books that I see, they're just like, you know, oh, I want to draw like, you know, muscular guy fighting, you know, and that's all fun. I like that stuff too. But I felt like going to the comic store where I was like, you know, like bored with a lot of things. I just was like, what, you know, why is there no comics like this? You know, this is the kind of thing I'd like to see. So I do like these, you know, drawings of characters in my sketchbook, and then doing these drawings of city scenes and stuff. I just kind of wanted to make a comic book about being in like a New York City type of place that wasn't super crowded and you know, disgustingly dirty and all the negative stuff, and kind of created this sort of like fantasy city, you know, where it's just like, oh, there's not a lot of people around and you mostly just see kids, and you know, it's like kind of like the way Peanuts made me feel growing up, where it's like there's not really adults around. And yeah, and so I just kind of I think I started like thumbnailing the first issue, and then I just did the whole first issue, and then I waited like a few months after, like, I think I applied for the Xeric grant for that. Did I get the Xeric grant for that, or yeah? So yeah, okay. So Pop Gun War 1 issue 1 had a Xeric grant, which is the Eastman and Laird, or Peter Laird, I guess, started that. But no longer, because of crowdfunding stuff, he stopped doing that. But that was great. I loved that that would existed. I probably wouldn't have made Popcorn War without it. But yeah, I kind of just a way of like, okay, this city, the background and stuff is like part of the story. It's like a character or something, you know, where it's like there's this like weird magical world that kind of looks like New York, but it's not, you know. So I felt like that was kind of like my goal, was just sort of like creating an emotion without really any kind of, there's not really any subtext to it or any, you know, a lot of, I remember when I first started doing it, some people would come back to me and like, oh, I like the art, but what is weird, man? I don't know what this means. It's weird. What are you trying to say with this? I'm like, not really anything. Just kind of like, that feeling when you look out the window and you see like birds going by and kind of makes you feel something funny. I don't know. Like that's kind of what I'm going for,
Now, Popgun War is really the book that kind of put you on the map. Did you feel at the time that you started that this was going to be, the big one?
No, I don't know what I was thinking, honestly. Like I'm really bad at planning for my future. So I think if I, if like myself now could go back that I guess I wouldn't tell myself not to make it, but I don't think I had like big expectations for it or anything, but I think like from doing that especially just doing like that first issue, like that got me more work, early on than like anything, like going into the DC offices or the Marvel offices or whatever and hanging out and all that stuff. Like having that first issue of Popgun War, and I think probably having like a Xeric grant helped for that, because that got like a little bit of notoriety. And then I got a gold medal from the Society of Illustrators. Like the first year they did a sequential category. I had a friend on the jury. The fix was in. So I think like all that stuff, it's like, oh, I had a business card I could just give to people or sell or whatever. I think because like the first comic I made on my own was called Smith's Adventure, the Super Mundane. I did that in art school and then published that right when I got out of art school. And that I would just give away to people. But I was like, I put a Popgun War through, the previews catalog, and I did, back then it was like way easier to sell like an independent comic through them. You didn't like need a publisher or anything like that. So like, yeah, from that issue of Popgun War, like Dinah Schutz just called me up out of the blue, and I was working at a coffee shop and offered me a job at Dark Horse, like a short story for an anthology. And I think I probably got the job at DC working on Caper, I did a series for DC called Caper, Bob Schreck. And that was kind of the same deal. It's like, I think he had an issue of it. And like when Judd Winnick was like looking around at artists, he was like, hey, what is this? I like this guy's stuff, Same thing with Omega, the Unknown. I think like drawing all those New York City scenes and me living in New York City, that was why Lethem contacted me about doing that. He's like, oh, this is exactly what, this is where I grew up. I want someone that can draw New York like in this way and stuff. So
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it all goes back to me taking that class at art school, like drawing buildings in New York, just because getting over an anxiety or a dread I had about drawing backgrounds, where it's like, oh, the drawing backgrounds is fun, you just kind of find the joy in it. It's not like, shouldn't be a chore, like, oh, I gotta draw buildings now. It's like, oh no, buildings are cool and weird looking,
especially in New York.
Yeah, and I had a buddy too that he would point out graffiti to me, and that was something I never noticed before. Like when I moved to New York, I was like, I was still like in my sheltered, I'm a Christian kid, in this big city. I've never been in a big city before. And I thought it was funny because I would look up and be like, oh, there's actually water towers on like almost all these buildings, just like in Spider-Man comics. And it's like, oh, there's flagpoles. Okay. Daredevil's always saved himself by a flagpole or whatever. It's like, does actually exist. They're not just, made up for these things. But another thing too is like, you don't see this. I didn't see this in Marvel comics growing up. It was like a friend of mine would just be like, oh, there's some cool graffiti up there. And it'd be like way on top of a building, just like almost like hidden. And I'd be like, oh yeah, that person had to climb up there and get to that. And, so I think like after that, I started going around and looking at, oh, that looks neat. And I noticed putting in my drawings, not to like, I'm not a tagger, like I don't know how to graffiti, but I would just, from my photo reference or looking at life, I would just kind of do a good gestural, like, oh, kind of mimic whatever's going on there. And I felt like it adds so much more weight to a thing when you could see like, oh, there's like a peeling sign in the background on that thing.
Yeah, for sure.
There's like someone's name scrawled there in the corner or something, and it looks real. It doesn't look like, oh, I just made this wall up and stuck a
Yeah.
post no bills thing on it.
I mean, that's part of one of the reasons why I love your work is it has so much depth.
Oh, thank you.
This is a bit of a random question, but I have to ask. You also worked on an issue of Grendel, Red, White, and Black.
Oh yeah,
That
yeah,
seems
yeah, yeah.
that seems like an odd one for you. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So Matt Wagner is Dinah Schutz, who is this used to be the senior editor over there at Dark Horse a few years ago, up until a few years ago. She worked there for years. Her sister, I think, is married to Matt Wagner, and they're really good friends. And Bob Schreck too is, he at the time he was a DC editor, but he was Diane Schutz's ex-husband, and they were still buddies. And it seemed like there's this whole like circle of friends, and they would like, hey, have you seen this artist? This is like a young guy coming up doing that, So I think I got introduced to Matt Wagner through Diana, because she was putting together the Black, White, and Red Grendel stuff. She was his editor, as well as being his sister-in-law. And she asked me, I don't know if an artist fell through. It seemed like that's happened a couple of times, or some other artist couldn't do it. But Matt Wagner had specific instructions that he passed on to Diana. And then we talked about it later. He's a really great guy. He's really funny. But I guess him and John Byrne don't get along, or didn't get along, which isn't surprising, because I don't think John Byrne gets along with a lot of people. I've heard a lot of stories about him, and had some personal interactions with him too that were kind of interesting. But Matt Wagner, so there's a character in that story. I don't know if you remember the story, how the story went, but there's a character in that story that's he's a pedophile, basically. He's like kidnaps this girl and wants to take like boudoir photography of her, and then Grendel comes in and beats the hell out of him and kills him. I think murders him, as all pedophiles should be. But I had specific instructions from Matt to make him look like John Byrne, the pedophile.
Right. Okay.
He's like, that's the only thing. He's like, here's this short story, weird short story, whatever, but make sure this guy looks like John Byrne, because fuck that guy. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to swear on this or not. Although,
no, you can. It's fine. Okay. Now, your most notable mainstream work came in the form of Omega the Unknown, as you discussed before with Jonathan Lethem. Now, were you a fan of Omega the Unknown before this? And what was it like to work with such a renowned American author like Jonathan on a comic book?
Well, that was amazing. I actually didn't really know Omega the Unknown that well. I mean, I kind of recognized him from the, Marvel Superheroes Handbook thing, but I never read the issues. Lethem, however, I was a big fan of. Like before I moved to Portland, I was just visiting, and I went to a friend took me to Powell's, which is one of the best bookstores in the world as far as I'm concerned. And he just pulled a book off the shelf and was like, oh, have you read Motherless Brooklyn? It's great. This is my favorite author. I was like, okay, cool, I'll buy it. So I read it while I was visiting, read the whole thing. And then I went back to New York for a little bit and was hanging out with his friend in New Jersey. And then I got an email from Jonathan Lethem, not too much longer after I read it. And he's like, hey, Farel, it's Jonathan Lethem. You want to draw a book at Marvel with me? And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, love your work. That's great. Thanks.
That must have been crazy.
Yeah, it was awesome. And so we went around, we walked through Washington Heights and Inwood, with the camera. He sent me some pictures too, but there was a lot of specific places. He's like, okay, I want a scene to take place on that street corner there. He's like, this is a cool spot here. Maybe we can have some things that, we just kind of talked about the comic and walked around, and it was really, really cool. And then later when we did a little, little mini book tour, me, him, and the colorist, Paul Hornschmeyer, who's like a great cartoonist in his own right. And he designed the book and everything too. We went up to the CCS school in Vermont and talked to the students up there. So that was kind of fun, getting to take a road trip with one of my heroes.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I would say, you mentioned, taking reference photographs and things like that. Working with novelists sometimes that make the jump into comics don't always work because they kind of don't necessarily speak the language of comics. But I mean, how much input did you have in terms of the layouts and stories given Jonathan's scripts?
I pretty much went off of his scripts like as best I could. Jonathan, he grew up being an artist. Like he started as an artist, and he was. I mean, I'm kind of lucky in like all the times that I've worked with writers. I've gotten to work with a lot of good writers, and you know, I actually haven't worked with a writer that I'm like, oh, this is horrible. I don't want to do this. So like most of the, you know, most of the times when I'm like, oh, I don't want to work on this, it's just like my own laziness. But yeah, he knows like about art and stuff. There was, I think like in the first or second issue that we did, there was a couple of times where there was a lot, because his writing, you know, he's a great writer, but you know, it's kind of like the Alan Moore syndrome of like, you probably don't need all this information, but I'm going to put a lot in here.
Yeah.
And so there was a couple of times I think where I had to call him or email him like, hey, I can't really fit this and this in here. Could I break this up? Or could I do it like this? Or, you know, there was a couple times, but then I think after that, he just kind of let me do whatever. And I just tried to do the best, you know, follow it, be as clear as possible. Like, I feel like that was like my main job as an illustrator. You know, when I'm writing my own stuff, I don't really care if like everyone understands everything. But if there's a writer that's like took the time to say like, this is what I want, I'm going to try to get as close to his vision as I can, you know, like, I feel like it's less of a, I mean, that's a collaboration, I guess, but it's like, I'm doing all the visual stuff. He's doing all the writing stuff. I want to make sure that whatever his intention is manifest as close as possible as what, you know,
sure
they have in mind.
Now, the co-creator of Omega the Unknown, Steve Gerber, at the time expressed outrage that someone was, you know, creating a series based on his character without his participation. How did that play out, and did that affect you know, the way that you guys designed and created the book?
It didn't really affect the way we created it at all. I know it was a bummer to Jonathan because that Omega the Unknown was like a big deal to him growing up. Like that was like one of his favorite comics, and like, I mean, he wrote about it even in Fortress of Solitude. I think it's like there's an essay he wrote about mute comic book characters, mute heroes, and then, you know, it's like Omega the Unknown. He's like mostly silent, and Black Bolt from the Inhumans, and a bunch of other guys. It was a really great essay, but he was pretty sad about Steve Gerber being so upset about it. So he reached out to him. I think even before it was announced or anything, he sent him a letter and stuff, and didn't hear back. And I know that Gerber and who is this co-writer? Mary Screens? Is that it?
Yeah, it was the co-writer with Steve Gerber was Mary Screens. Yeah.
So they even did made a website that was like, Omega the Unknown, the original creator of this is, you know, and I think looking back on it, or even at the time, it seemed to me that like, when I talked to Jonathan about this, I think Steve was so burnt by the Howard the Duck stuff and Marvel, like, I don't think he cared for Marvel, you know? So I think when it was announced, like, oh, they're taking an ad out in Time magazine and they have this like famous author and, you know, doing all this stuff, you know, it's like, and they're going to do the same thing with Howard, you know, they did with Howard the Duck. And it's like, but no one cared about Omega the Unknown, like really, you know, it wasn't like, he wasn't the huge cultural phenomenon that Howard the Duck was.
Right.
And I'm all like, creators' rights and screw Marvel, like, I want to, you know, but then it's also like, you know, it was a work for hire thing. It was like, you know, it seemed like really nuanced and stuff. And I think Jonathan did the right thing, like reached out to him, but he wasn't happy about it. But then I think after the books came out, I think he saw what we were doing, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I felt like there was some change there, because he reached out to me before he died, because while we were working on the series, he died and Jim Mooney died, which was really sad. But it was like, oh man, it's like, it's like I want to make a joke about, you know, oh, we killed these guys with our comic, but I think the book we did is amazing. I think it's really good. Not to toot my own horn, but I think that was like one of the best things that Marvel put out that they never really advertised or anything. But
for sure,
he actually reached out to me then before he died. It was like on MySpace or something, I think. And he said, "Hey, I like your art. This is cool job you're doing, and all the best." And I didn't know that at the time he was, probably like terminal or something, and maybe he was just trying to make peace with everyone before he passed. But I don't know. That was really cool of him to do that.
That is really cool. I mean, and it's true. He was interviewed by Comic Book Resource, and he was quoted as saying that he had misjudged you guys, basically.
Oh, that's awesome.
Now I wanted to talk about your work on Prophet at Image, which really seemed to have given a good number of artists a big push into the somewhat mainstream. Artists like yourself, Simon Roy, Malachi Ward, and Grim Wilkins. What was it like to work on that, and how did you get brought on board?
I got brought on board through Brandon Graham. We've been buddies since the New York days. He didn't go to art school with me, but I met him shortly afterwards. And we just stayed in touch over the years. And he told me that he was working on this book with Simon and showed me some of the artwork. And I was like, oh man, I want to do that. And he's like, well, I don't think Simon's going to be able to do like this monthly. So we're wanting to bring in guest artists. And I got this whole concept of like, it's clones, and you can kind of do your own clone, and we can do, different stories with different artists. And it was pretty like, I don't know if Brandon was thinking that far ahead about it, but it was, in hindsight, it was pretty masterful the way it all happened. And so I just went up to Vancouver. He was living in BC at the time, and I went up there, and I was living in Portland, and I just went up there and hung out with him for like a week in his apartment, and just did sketchbook drawings, and kind of came up with the bare bones idea of like, oh, my guy has a tail, and why does he have a tail, and this and that. And then we would do like Skype calls, and I would do like thumbnails and send them to him. And he's like, well, what if we had this, or what if you switch this around? So it was a really nice way of working. I've never worked like that before or since with anybody. It was very, very collaborative, like way more collaborative than, I felt like I was kind of like co-writing the issue, because he's basically like, what do you want to draw? And I'm like, well, I like this and this. And so it was really fun. It was just when it actually sat down to draw it for me, like most of the times where I'm like, oh man, this is a lot of work, and I want to make this look cool. I want to make this look, blow people away. I think Yanni had the right idea of like, I gotta get these pages done, get paid. And I'm like, that's why I just did 2 issues, because I spent like months on the issues that I did. But I wish I could have done more. It was so fun. I love the concept. I still think about it, like how what a cool comic that is.
Yeah.
Was. I mean,
for
it's
sure.
so neat to take like this thing. Like I never was a big fan of Liefeld's work. So it was kind of neat to sort of redeem this. Just, we're going to take the name of this thing, and maybe it's names of some few other things, and just do like a completely crazy different thing. And it was neat because I felt like we got like an audience. It's kind of like my most successful project that I think I've worked on, because it's like we got some people that were just sort of like the nostalgia, like, hey, I remember that Rob Liefeld Image Comics. I felt like got some of those people in there, and then got a lot of like stoner sci-fi type people that were like, but I think more than anything, it really filled like a hole that maybe there's more comics like this now, but it felt like at the time it had like this real Euro vibe to it, like a European trash comic, like a good science fiction, cool. I don't mean trash in a bad way, but I mean the stuff I like, it's like you just don't see that often in American comics to me, where it's just like just weird sci-fi stuff, There's no
for sure,
or anything, it's like we took like the 90s super commercial whatever project and then made this like Dune thing out of it, and that's mostly a testament to Brandon and Simon, their crazy visions. If I hadn't seen Simon's artwork, I never would have thought to do anything like that, but I just saw him do it. I was like, oh man, that looks so neat. I love that. Like, it's like, I want to be a part of that,
Now you mentioned Meat House. You are a part of that collective, which includes no shortage of other amazing cartoonists like Sophie Campbell and Jim Rugg. Can you tell us about that, how it got started, and what the purpose of the collective is?
Yeah. So basically, how it got started is that I went to Angoulême in I think it was like 99 or 2000, something like that. I went 2 years in a row, but the first time I went with, I still think I'm bragging when I say this, but I went with the artist James Jean, who's like super famous now. We were
Yeah.
roommates at the time, and right across the hall from our place in Brooklyn lived Tomer Hanuka. He's also in Meat House, but another like amazing illustrator, famous illustrator guy. And I think Tomer's brother he's an amazing cartoonist too, Asaf Hanuka. But at the time he was living, because they're twin brothers, fraternal twins from Israel. And Tomer went to School of Visual Arts, and Asaf went to the cartooning bande dessinée school in I think in Angoulême. He went to like a cartooning school in Paris, maybe. It was in Paris or Angoulême or something. It was some kind of fancy cartooning school in France. And he's, got work right away, and, he's amazing. He's done like a bunch of books and stuff. But Asaf introduced us around to like a bunch of his friends. Like, he's like, oh, here's some Belgian cartoonists that I know, and here's some, some other friends and stuff. So we ended up hanging out with these guys that did a book called Spawn, and it's not McFarlane Spawn. It's Spon, Spawn. I don't know what it means. But they were doing a anthology book together, and they did one a week for a year, like a printed, finished comic book a week. And I was just so blown away by that. I was like, what, you guys putting this out? And I was like super excited at the time about self-publishing. Like, I went to Small Press Expo around then. It was like this whole world was like new for me. It was just like, whoa, there's a whole like subculture of people that make their own books and sell them or give them, pass them out to each other or whatever, trade them. So meeting those guys, I talked with James and Tomer about it, and we were all like, oh, that's pretty neat. They do this thing once a week. And then when I got back to New York, I was talking to my friend Chris McD, who's an animator and also into like self-publishing and stuff. And we were kind of shooting around. I told him about that Spawn comic, and I was like, oh, it'd be neat to do something like that. And he's like, oh, I got a bunch of friends, and I think he came up with the name Meat House, or like him and another friend, Serge, were shooting ideas around. And I think like, I was like, hey, we should use that name, since you guys, so we just were, I don't remember exactly when it happened, but it was something like, because of conversations with Chris and Serge and James and Tomer. And then we just ended up asking a bunch of people we went to school with. And there was someone I worked with at a vegan restaurant that I knew did comics. And I was like, hey, you should join too, because he was always making his own little, he remember him giving me a Christmas card when I first started working there. That was a comic. I was like, oh, cool. You do comics. That's so cool. And it turned out we had some friends in common and stuff. So it was like mostly SVA students, friends of ours, that were either graduated or were about to graduate. Or in the case of James, I think he was like a junior or something at that point. And he's a prodigy. We just happened to know so many great artists. I was just like, oh, we should do this, but instead of doing it once a week, let's do it once a month. And we'll do like 12 issues or something. But then like, we did one issue. It was just like a floppy. And then I think it took us like a few months to do the next one, and then a few more months. And then I think by the fourth or fifth issue, it was like we were doing like one a year or something, but they were getting bigger and bigger and fancier and fancier. I remember when we did that first issue, I was like so excited about it. And then James was like, yeah, me and Tom were talking. It's like, the design on that is kind of embarrassing. Like, you should let us do it. And I was like, oh, geez, okay. So like, I definitely knew where my, after a bit, it's like, I'm glad we did it and the immediacy of it. And I think that's what I liked about that Spawn comic. But I also like that it kind of kept getting notched up. Like every issue we did kept getting, so by issue 9, the last one, SOS, I didn't really have much to do with it other than I contributed a story. But that one looks amazing. It's full color, and it's got like so many different artists that like all those guys know. Like there's a few people in there that I know, like Brandon and stuff, and Tomer, and not Tom, Tom Herpick, like And he worked on Adventure Time, so he brought in a bunch of his buddies. I think this was even before Adventure Time, but it seemed like a lot of the people that worked on Adventure Time were in that issue. I think maybe because Chris and Tom Herpick were both in animation, so they knew a bunch of other animators. And it seemed like anyone that did animation also made their own comics too. Kind of just went hand in hand. So yeah, it just kind of grew into this like big thing. And then yeah, that was the last, and that was, I don't know, like 10 years ago or something.
Wow.
We keep in touch here and there. I keep in touch with some of the people, but we've all kind of gone our own ways.
And speaking of making your own comics, The Wrenchies was your next major work. Another one about the pressures of adulthood. And that was published through First Second, who are mostly known for their young adult books. Now, how did you get involved with them? And did you feel like you had to make the book fit more with their younger readership?
Well, at the time when I was introduced to First Seconds, where they were like a pretty new company when I signed with them. Mm-hmm. I mean, it took me about 5 years of working on the Wrenchies to finish it. And then it was like a year before it got published. So it was about, from the time I signed the contract to the time I had a book in my hands, I think it was about 7 years. Wow. So the company changed a lot during that time. And I was, I'm a ball of stress. I'm sure I was not a fun person to work with, but I like all the people. There was only 4 people working there at the time. But now I think there's more people there, and a lot of people I don't even know. Mm-hmm. I didn't feel like I had to change anything. Like my editor was Callista, and she didn't give me like a ton of input like while I was working on it. And she had some nice notes and stuff when I finished with it. So I could tell she read it and liked it and everything. She was like really talking me up, like, hey, we can get you all this money, do whatever you want, And so to me, I was like, okay, well, that sounds good, I guess. Maybe I should do that because it's better than what I'm doing now, which is I don't really know what I'm doing. And so she took me around to like New York publishers and stuff like that. And I basically used the 15 pages I did in that Meat House SOS story and a couple other like character sketches. And like, I think I wrote like a few pages of a plot. And yeah, we went around to like Pantheon and a bunch of different places. And then it was like, okay, we're going to do this bidding thing. All the publishers can bid on it, and it's going to maybe get in a bidding war or something. I think First Second was the only person that was like, yeah, we want to publish you. We want to publish you before you did this anyway. So, so I basically signed the contract with that. It was through that agent, Bernadette. She got me that book deal, and then it was just a matter of me working on it. And then I mostly just was in contact with her, where she would call me up and be like, hey, did you make any more progress in the book? Or even when she lived in Portland, we would meet up every once in a while, and I would show her pages and stuff. And she doesn't really know like a ton about art or anything, but she knows books and everything. So she was like, this looks great. This is going to be great. She's a very positive, encouraging person. And I don't know. It came out, and then it was weird because it was like, I guess it was such like a whirlwind for me. I didn't realize like First Second is like this big company. It's like they're owned by Macmillan, which is owned by Holt Springs. It's this like big corporation. So it was kind of a weird experience to have like no involvement in the story or anything. But then like when I went to do the cover, it was like a lot of involvement, where it seemed like kind of like, I don't think even anyone is aware of what's in this comic. It's just, there's more about like, well, what is going to sell? What kind of image will sell the book,
Sure, yeah.
So they were like, okay, I'm going to, the designer was like, I'm going to take this in front of the sales and marketing team and see what they think. And I'm like, sales and marketing team? I thought there was like 4 people there. What's going on? So that was kind of like a sort of an eye-opening thing for me. It's like, oh, it got on the New York Times bestseller list. Isn't that great? And I was like, well, what does that mean? Like, how many copies have it sold? And they're like, well, you should be more excited. Why are you more excited that you're on the bestseller list? And I'm like, well, I am, but I just don't know what that means. Like, what does that mean? It's like no one could ever seem to be able to tell me anything about it. So I don't know. Right. It was kind of an odd. I don't think I would, as nice as everyone is and great, I just don't think I want to do that again, put myself there.
Right.
That was a
Sure,
long
yeah.
time working in something in isolation. So that was fun, like working on Profit, where I was like, do the issue, comes out immediately, and then people are emailing me like, oh man, that was great. You know, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
this is weird. Oh, cool. Okay. I'm part of a hit book now for the first time in forever. So it's like Wrenchies being on New York Times bestseller list, like it doesn't seem like that really meant as much, you know, in the same kind of way, you know, like to me, it's like,
Right.
oh, that's my art. You know, I'm glad I made that. And you know, hopefully that book will stay in print and everything. But yeah, it was such a different experience, those two things, you know. It's like instant gratification versus, you know, this thing. I don't know. I think Profit, our Profit will be around for a while, hopefully, but if not, whatever. Everything's fleeting.
For sure.
You know?
Now, a lot of your work seems to embrace going off into tangents, and when brought around full circle, make up parts of a greater story. Is this on purpose, or does your style take you in crazy directions that you just have to go with, or is it a lot more pre-planned than that?
Well, yeah, I don't know if you can tell just talking to me here, like how much I go off on tangents. So it's like you asked me a question, I'm like, I don't remember what the question was, but I just said a lot of things. Yeah, I mean, I plan it. I plan it, like I write it out and stuff. Like the last, I guess, I mean, I had 2 books come out last year, Proxima Centauri and The Often Wrong, but The Often Wrong doesn't have much comics in it. It's more like an art book. Proxima Centauri was like, I guess the last book that I did where I'm like, okay, you know, so that I was trying to do like a page a day, like would wake up and so like each issue, like I broke it down into issues before I drew it. I was like, okay, in this issue, I want this to happen. I want this to happen. Here's where I want it to end up. So, yeah, I just like, I wrote out to some degree, but I didn't like write a full script. And within that, I remember, especially like in the first or second issue, there was one point where I was drawing one page and I was like, you know what? I want the next page to be this other just random, like a tangent. I just want this other just weird thing to happen. That's it'll tie in, but it'll hopefully like make people think about this bigger world. And so I just added a page in there and I was like, oh, you know what? I'm not gonna, and this is like me having complete liberty. It's like, oh, it's my own book at Image. It's like a month, it's gonna come out monthly. Eric is rad and was basically like, yeah, we'll publish you. Sure. You know, like Eric Stevenson, the Image publisher. And so I felt, and Brandon too was like very encouraging, even at the time. Like I think we were living together when I started it. We like lived together for a few months in Portland. We both went through breakups and like 2 single dudes at the time. And he was like really encouraging. Like I felt like when I was working on the Wrenchies, like I couldn't get people to look at pages, you know, but like Brandon was like, this is great. This is like the best work of your career and all this stuff, which I don't know if that was true, but you know, I believe he thought it was true, but I you know, having all those things, you know, it's like, oh, I have complete liberty to do this. I wouldn't, make changes like, oh, this page, I'm just going to pencil. Like, I'm not going to color it or anything or ink it or anything. And this page, you know, I'm going to go off in this, in the story, I'm just going to have a bunch of different characters for this one issue and not focus on the main character, which was like super fun. I don't know ultimately if it was like how successful it was. Like, I mean, I know financially it was not successful at all, but I mean, I'm glad I made it, but it's like, it was so recent too, that it's just like hard for me to, it's still in that stage where it's almost kind of hard for me to look at. I'm like, okay, that wasn't too bad. Yeah, I don't know. I think like the next thing I do on my own, I would like to try to find some kind of editor type person that I very like, that I'm synced up with, you know, that kind of gets what I'm going for, or at least that I could bounce stuff off of, because it's my creative process. It's so weird. Like I'm not the best professional, you know, stuff like that, where it's like I kind of you know, I need to throw fits and stuff like while I'm working on it. So I would like to be able to find someone, or maybe someone's, maybe I should just reach out to a bunch of different people and, you know, get him to look at the work before it's just, the thing is too, drawing something, like after I've drawn it, like I don't want to make changes after I've drawn something, So it's like, it's kind of hard to take something that's like an idea and be like, try to explain it to someone, even on paper, when you write it out, and like, it'll be good. It's this thing that I want to make this thing. And, just trust me, it'll be fine, And then when I've drawn it, if it doesn't work, I don't want to change it then. It's like, well, I've already drawn it, So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that must be especially, it must be especially challenging considering you pencil, ink, color, and letter everything. Yeah. You've gone through that whole process. I can totally understand why. It's done. Now, speaking about Proxima Centauri, I noticed that it was originally launched on Study Group online, at least the first chapter anyway, and then it was published through Image. Was it always meant to be a webcomic originally, or not?
I had some grand idea of having it come out monthly, like with the comic on the Study Group site. And this is basically what I was talking about a minute ago, like being bad at like professional and planning things in advance. It was just like, oh, I got this idea, I'm going to do this, So I wanted it to, like, even the comic itself, I wanted it to kind of, I don't play video games, but I wanted the comic to sort of feel like a video game, or like, oh, each issue is he's going to fight a boss. And, there's always so I'm like, okay, I'll do this on Study Group. Because like going back, It Will All Hurt came out as a webcomic on Study Group Comics. So like I met Zach Soto in Portland, who runs Study Group Comics. And he asked me at the time, and it was like when I was working on Wrenchies, like, do you want to do something for this webcomic porthole that I'm doing? And I was like, oh, actually, I am doing this thing that I wasn't even thinking about publishing, but it's just like a way for me to blow off steam while I'm working on the Wrenchies. It's called It Will All Hurt. And then he was like, oh, great. I'll put it out. I'd love it. So I that's a whole nother thing. So I did that. And then when I started doing Proxima Centauri, because it's kind of tied in with that, all my comics are sort of tied in together. Excuse me. I hit up Zach and was like, hey, can I put this out? And he's like, sure, yeah, whatever you want to do. And I just kind of fell off on doing it, basically. So it was originally intended as a Image comic series. Like I approached Eric with the idea, and then I asked him and Brandon both. I'm like, is it going to be a big deal if I put it on Study Group for free? And then I think the consensus was Brandon and Eric were both like, that doesn't affect sales at all. Like it doesn't matter. Eric less so. I mean, but me and Brandon were kind of just basing this off our own experience of like, I think the people that will go to a website to look at webcomics probably aren't the same type of people that would buy something from Comixology or necessarily buy a floppy comic or the trade even, like I almost feel like they're all kind of different audiences. So I wanted to do each issue through Study Group. It was basically kind of a pain in the ass to convert everything to GIFs and do all the, reformat it for the web. And I flaked. I was just like, I was going to do all the issues through Study Group, and I just did the first one, and I just didn't email Zach, and he got busy and I got busy. And then I was like, people can buy it from Comixology or something if they want. Right. And, I'll give them the first issue for free, but it just felt kind of weird. I was just like, I got a bunch of excuses why I didn't,
Now, a lot of artists have consistent themes that they work with. The major theme in your work, from Pop Gun War all the way up to Proxima Centauri, seems to be childhood, specifically children finding themselves in scenarios that are way over their heads. And yet these aren't necessarily children's stories. There's a sense of discovery and growth, and sometimes a lack thereof. And yet you deal with some heavy themes. What is it about this clash that keeps you coming back?
I think as far as like the stuff from like, there's like certain things that really resonate with me at the right time that I feel like I'm always trying to like recapture. And so growing up in that real like religious environment, there was like something about like that time in my life. Like I don't know. It's like, I guess everyone kind of does that. It's like nostalgia, but like, I remember like seeing the movie The Chocolate War, on cable or something, and then reading that book, the book by Robert Cormier, and like there's, you know, something about that, something about like the movie Stand By Me, and then like reading the body. There's all these like things that were like, I was at that age when I saw that thing, and then it made me feel a certain way. And it's like my work, anything I write on my own is like somehow referencing, like trying to recapture whatever that vibe was at that point. You know, it's like, it's anytime I try to think of like, oh, I'm gonna write a story about you know, a grown-up doing grown-up thing, it feels kind of embarrassing, you know. Like something about like writing kids talking, you know, swearing at each other and being dicks and stuff. Like there's something about that's like I don't know, it's like this weird magic that I associate with it. That that's just the fun part for me, is like, oh, I want to tap into that thing. Tap into that part of my life, whatever that is.
Now, how do you balance childhood and adulthood for your audience? Do you ever worry about a book being too adult for children or too childish for adults? Is it a tough line to walk?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I felt, especially like the Wrenchies, that was like a real sticky point for me, because like I wanted to put in some, you know, as many as I could, like, you know, veiled autobiographical stuff. Like the character Hollis was like, I wouldn't say that's like me as a little kid necessarily, but there's so much of me in that guy, you know? So like there was a few things I put in there where I felt like, you know, after I'd done the page, I'm like, oh man, people are this is weird. Or people, you know, I have kids doing drugs in this and stuff. But my intention with that book was not as a kid's book. I wasn't thinking like, this is a kid's book. You know, it was like, oh, this is a comic book that is a story that can be read by hopefully anybody, but maybe if you have got young kids, probably don't want to let them look at it, because there's like swears in it and some awkward stuff, and weird, super violence and cartoony violence, but still like pretty gory, you know. I think I heard one reviewer refer to it as oppressive. I was like, oh, it seems like a pretty good, you know, hopefully there's some inspirational stuff in there, but there's definitely like a nightmare, dark vibe to that book, which is what I intended. Because, you know, I'm a big fan of David Lynch, and I like the way his stuff does that, where it's like super dark and oppressive, but there's also these like really inspiring, you know, uplifting moments in his work too. And I feel like it's richer because of the dark stuff. You know, like the good parts are better because of how, you know, how masterfully he can craft this like really creepy, you know, moment. I think with the Wrenchies, I asked some people specifically about a couple of scenes, and then I tried to tell people that it's like, this is not a kid's book, you know. That was even one of the things at first second, which I felt like you mentioned before, is like how they're pretty much like a children's book line now.
I mean, children's books and also like YA stuff.
Yeah. And I felt like there's something like, while I was working on the Wrenchies, there was a shift that happened at the company where they were like, this is the only growth market in books, is the 6 to 12 market. So, so it seemed like they were signing a lot more authors that did that kind of work, and they were kind of present, you know, and I don't think they published a GP book since those first two, which is definitely, those are not kids' books at all. And that was kind of more the vibe that I was trying to get through. Even it's like, okay, I have kid protagonists for the most part in my story, except for the Sherwood stuff, the later Sherwood stuff. But I think when people, especially like you see a cover with kids on it, they're going to like think, oh, it's a kid's book. You know, it's like the curse of the comics, you know, Comics Code Authority thing. It's like, oh, these are kids. These are for kids. So if you have stuff in it that is not for kids, then that's bad. You shouldn't be allowed to publish that. It's like, no, I didn't say this was for kids, you know? So it was kind of weird, because like I originally had Hollis on the cover, and then, I'm not gonna tell you the whole story about the cover, because there was a lot of back and forth on it. But it was kind of weird, because it was like, they were like, we don't want Hollis on the cover because people think it's a kid's book. And I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like, here's 20 thumbnails of other things, you know. And then they were like, okay, well, we were thinking maybe if you put Sherwood on the cover. And I was like, okay. So I put him in a bunch of the thumbnails, but they're all of him as like a grown-up, you know, because there's a big chapter in there where he's like an adult. And then they got back to me and they were like, we were thinking if you had Sherwood on there, but as a kid. And I was like, but that you just told me that, you know, so this is like, I think this was like sales and marketing team and other people that don't know, you know, people getting their wires crossed kind of thing, where it's like, you're telling me a bunch of stuff that I'm not, you know, and also I'm not the smartest person in the world. But so I think after one of the back and forth, it was eventually like, what if we just had these three characters, you know, Bance, Tad, and Marcy on the cover. And I even put Sherwood in the corner there, the little person. And then I put blood on Bance's knife, you know, kind of just hoping that like, oh, people will see that and know kind of more what they're in for, you know?
Yeah.
That was like, that was like a concern for me. It was like, people are going to look at this and think it's this thing that it's not, you know?
Right.
You know, I think that's like that was like the job of the cover is like, how do you sum up what this thing is and but still be interested, you know, pull people in, you know, basically to your story, but not have some kind of breach of contract or like, hey, I thought it was this one thing and it's not this thing. So I hate this, you know, you're a bad person for making me think this. So I don't know. It was definitely like concerning for me. And then I remember they at some point suggested putting like a 14 to 17-year-old thing on the back. And I was like, I don't know if that wasn't my intention or, so I don't even know if that got on the actual finished thing, but that's basically like first seconds thing. It's like, oh, this is for 14 to 17-year-olds. And I was like, well, that wasn't who I was doing it for. I wasn't not doing it for 14 to 17-year-olds, but I was still thinking like people that like a good comic story will maybe be turned off by it's a young adult book. I don't want to read that, you know?
I see on Instagram that you're doing a daily drawing project over 366 days. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that was like basically what I was saying before. I get these like harebrained ideas and I'm like, I'm going to do this thing and like commit to it. So I think like a week, you know, the last week of last year, I was just, you know, not feeling good about my work ethic and, you know, just life in general. I was like, I cannot get these pages drawn, man. Like, I don't know what my deal is. Like, you know, I still struggle with that a lot where it's like, I just can't, you know, so I just got this idea of like, okay, 2020, I'm going to do a drawing every day. I'm going to make a public statement about it that I'm going to do it. And so I'm sitting in the bathtub thinking about all this stuff, you know, like, okay, this is stuff I'm going to do. And I call it, do drawings in 20 minutes. Not spend any more than 20 minutes on it. Do one a day. I'll call it 2020, and sell them for $20. So I'm not like just losing time on this, you know, it's not like I'm making hardly anything, you know, with like shipping and everything like that. And I also felt like it was a good way for me to like build my Patreon up, you know? So it's like, okay, it'll be advertising for my Patreon. So that's the ultimate goal, is to get more people to join my Patreon. But also, because when I was doing the It Will Hurt, I did them on these like small pages. There's like 2 panels per page, you know, and I put them in the book, or I felt like they would look nice on the web like that, basically was my idea. But putting the book, I'm like, I can do six panel pages every page. And so I was going to a lot of conventions around the time, and I would bring all the originals that I had with me and just set them on my table and be like, $40 for 2 panels, you know, and those things would go like hotcakes. And like, that was like, I paid my rent like for a year doing that, basically, like going to shows and selling those little originals. And, you know, and I think like, you know, it's like people that don't want to spend like $300 or whatever, you know, a lot of people can't afford to buy original artwork. And so it's like a full page from even something like Omega or something like, you know, it's like I can't necessarily give those pages away, you know, and it's like, they're not like exactly selling tons, but I don't want to put the price so low that, you know, I don't know. It's just kind of a weird, selling original art's weird, you know? So I thought this was like a really good way of like, I'll have basically affordable art that people can easily display. It's not like owning an original comic page. Like, where are you going to hang that? You know, it just seems like a hassle, but if like you have like I noticed if you had like just like a little panel or something, people will, even if they're more expensive, will get those more sometimes than, you know, like, oh, this will look perfect. I know exactly the spot. This will go above my desk with all my other stuff versus like,
sure,
oh, I gotta pay half a wall for this thing. So I don't know, there's a bunch of ideas of that, but it was mostly like, oh, if I do this $20 a day drawing, it'll be a way for, like when I did it all her, it'll be a way for people to inexpensively purchase my art, like have original art for cheap.
All right. I have one final question for you before we end our interview. Farel, what can we expect from you in the future? Will there be more Proxima Centauri, or is there something else that we can look forward to?
Yeah. So the next book I'm going to do, if I ever get this, the current thing I'm working on right now is a book with Matt Kent that I mentioned, the mind management thing. But I do have future Proxima Centauri volumes planned. But the first thing I want to do is a Robot Todd miniseries. He's a character that was in It Will Hurt and some other things. So I was thinking like 4 to 6 issues of that. Like I have it mostly written and a few pages actually drawn of it.
Oh, cool.
I started last year, and then I had to take work. You know, it was like, Matt hit me up, and I was like, okay, I need the work. So, and you know, I like Matt and his writing, so I'm excited to work on it. I just am so slow. But yeah, Robot Todd, and then the 3rd volume of Popgun War, which I have pretty much written out. Tons of drawings for that. No pages done on that, but that'll be the next book. And then after that, the thing I would like to publish is like a future Proxima. I don't know if I'm going to call it Proxima Centauri Volume 2, but it'll basically be that. You know, it'll be like a further advance. Like once, because at the end of the story, spoilers, they go through that vortex thing. So it's like that series will mostly be them traveling through the vortex, and also a bunch of Sherwood stuff and like more stuff with the little Proxonaut guys that I had in a separate chapter.
Cool.
And hopefully it'll be a little more accessible too for readers.
Do you have any desire? Do you have any desire to do any like to sort of delve back into work with Marvel or DC, doing a superhero book or anything like that?
Not specifically. If I had a like a buddy of mine, Michael Conrad, that's actually Becky Cloonan's partner. He's great. He's a writer. He is doing. He did some stuff for DC. I think he did like a Doom Patrol something. I don't know why I mentioned him specifically. I was just trying to think of like if there's someone that like I'm friends with John Arcudi too. He lives here in Portland, and I like his writing a lot. So if there was someone like, if I got like an opportunity of like collaborating with someone on something, I think that would be way bigger a deal to me than like if he was like, hey, I'm doing this thing at DC, do you want to come draw it? You know, I would be much more into that than just be like, what if I could do another Batman story, but you know, this time he's in, you know, he's in a monastery or something. I don't know. Like, it just seems like it seems like it's all like the same stuff over and over. You know, it's like, oh, there's just this person's take on this thing that this company owns all the rights to. You know, it's like, well, I'll just make my own version of that thing.
Sure, you know? Yeah. Farel, thanks so much for being cornered with us today. Let's have a look at this art that you've created for us. Do you mind showing it to the camera?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's in a very early stage still. But
nice.
If I wasn't talking, I would totally have this done by now, I think. But
that's okay. We can always show the final art in the edit later on. If you want to own this magnificent piece of art, please check out the auction link in the description below. All the proceeds from the sale are going to benefit Don't Shoot PDX. Make sure to like and subscribe and click that little bell icon to get notified for future episodes. Thanks for watching Drawn and Cornered, and thank you, Farel, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.